Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rav Shmuel with you with this week's Devar Torah. I should say, give the whole introduction, right? Rav Shmuel ben Yehoshua, Rashbi, Rabbi Stephen Samuel, my middle name Epstein, hence the Shmuel. Hope you're doing well. We're going to talk about this week's Parsha, Chukat. Okay, so a lot of craziness going on in the world, isn't there? And there's a lot of animus against Jews. That's kind of my way of kind of tempering what I really kind of want to say. It's kind of hard for me. Maybe it is for you as well. To temper and to be as neutral as possible, disaffected, maybe that's a word, with our feelings, with what's going on with the Jewish community, and quite frankly, with the world community as well. Because of what's going on in Israel. A lot of people have said, well, I'm not really anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. I just don't like what Israel's doing, and I'm anti-Zionist. Zionism, of course, is a fairly modern term, about 150 years, that was coined to identify the movement of we Jews to resettle our native land of Israel, Judea. It's been called many things. Palestine was called that too. But really a lot of times it's just a way of making a socially acceptable statement that you don't like Jews. I mean, why wouldn't you want us Jews to have our own homeland? And we kind of have to justify that. So I don't really see this as becoming political or making a political statement. This is really more of a cultural or a heritage thing. If I said I don't like black people, or I think Spanish people need to go back to whatever, that would be considered prejudicial. That would be bigoted. It wouldn't be political. It would be considered a slight against them. I don't feel that way, of course, but again, I'm just making a point. Let's go back to Genesis. Let's go back to the Torah. God made man, right? And God made woman. And that was it. Not a Jewish man, not a Christian man, not a Muslim, not a Hindu, not a Buddhist, not a white, black, red, whatever other shades we happen to have with the human race on this planet. It is what it is, So again, love your neighbor as yourself. Respect people. Honor the stranger. That's really what it's all about. And that's what we need to strive to do. So there it is. Okay. Chukat. This is a very key parsha. This is where Miriam dies. Miriam, Mayim, same word. Well, similar word. Miriam, that was her name. Mayim, of course, is water. It was based on Miriam's merit that our ancestors were able to find water, say, every 3 days in the wilderness. Some very traditional Jews believe that it was basically the same well that just kind of followed them around. Other people say, no, she just had this knack or this blessing, let's put it that way, of being able to have water with her. And when she died, people are like, now what are we going to do, right? So what are we going to do, right? That's the question. The Israelites are asking, and rather logically, well, what are we going to do, right? Now, this is the generation that is going to conquer and settle the promised land. This is a generation that was the children of the generation that left Egypt. And some people say, well, here they are still complaining. Other people say, well, they're really asking. They're a little concerned. They're kind of anxious. We're in the wilderness. We're in the desert. I don't see any lakes anywhere, or any wells. What are we going to do? So God says to Moses and Aaron, okay, go speak to the rock, and, the rock will burst forth water. And there is all sorts of commentary on this because we know what happened. Moses takes his staff, smacks the rock once, a little trickle comes out, smacks it again, and there's a torrent of water. How many of you have ever seen the show Third Rock from the Sun, starring Joan Lithgow as the leader of an alien contingent that comes down to Earth and becomes human in order to study humanity? And Karen Johnson's his lieutenant. French Stewart is one of their soldiers or one of their explorers or whatever. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt, as a kid, was completed their little family. So John Lithgow takes on the identity of, I believe it was a history professor, same office as Jane Curtin. And there's this one scene when he's reading ostensibly the Torah. He's reading the Bible. And he's exclaiming, with chagrin, "What are you doing listening to that snake?" Talking about Eve. "Don't take the apple." And he goes, "Oh," and he's upset. The reason I mention this, I know we're not in Genesis, I know we're in Numbers, but Moses, God said, "Speak to the rock." Moses apparently lost it. 40 years of dealing with people, just being overwhelmed, and it just kind of got to him. And God said, "Okay, because you didn't sanctify my name, you and Aaron was part of it, will not go into the promised land." Now, this is the same phrase, more or less, that was used to describe why Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's older sons, were taken by God when they entered the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the tabernacle, with the wrong incense after ostensibly they were been drinking and partying with everybody else, celebrating the Mishkan and everything. And they were zapped, and that was the end of them, right? Because they didn't sanctify my name. In other words, they didn't go into the Holy of Holies. First of all, they weren't supposed to. Only the Kohen Gadol, only the high priest goes in. They were not high priests, nor was it Yom Kippur, and they were drunk, and they weren't even wearing the right clothes. Everything they did was wrong. So, being that, God took them because they didn't sanctify their name. In other words, they didn't follow God's wishes. God is in control. You either want God in control or you don't. If you don't, you got to bear the consequences. It's not like we're puppets, but, when you're kids, you go to your parents and your parents, give you various, commandments, various directions. Don't go too far. We're going to eat dinner soon, and I don't want to have to call you or scour the neighborhood for you to come and eat. You need to eat. You need your nutrition. Okay? You don't need to get dirty because dirt will cause all sorts of disease, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're free to go out and play and do some of those things, but at the same time, follow the guidelines. And that's really all God wanted. God wanted Aaron and Moses to sanctify his name. These people kind of needed their own reassurance that God was with them. Think of it that way. That's why God's like, sanctify my name, not, I'm God, give me the credit I'm due. I've got this, I'm an infinite being. I have an infinite ego. It wasn't that. It was that, you got to have faith in God to follow God's directions so that things ultimately turn out okay. If you don't sanctify God's name, if you do it the wrong way, God says, "Speak to the rock," you strike it. And Moses said, "Oh, ye rebels, let us draw water." There it is, right? So he didn't sanctify his name. God's like, "You blew it. You've had other times. I've warned you, and I can't let you go into the promised land. You can't do it." Now, this is contrasted with what happens next. And a forgotten tract was, is mentioned, the Book of Wars, which was kind of a log with what Israel was doing. It's forgotten, it's been lost, it's whatever. You see references every now and then. And it was recorded that they go off and they want to, in their travels, they want to go through Edom. And Edom, of course, says no, they don't want them going through. And God's like, well, I respect them. Edom was Esau's offspring, and Esau and Jacob, and he was blessed too. I got to respect it, and you have to respect it. So go around the other way. So they want to go through Moab, and that was a different story. And Amalek's there, and the Canaanites are there. And God says, go ahead and attack. They attacked, and they won, and, they were successful. Okay? Again, you follow God's directions, and things work out. You don't follow God's suggestion, recommendations, and directions, and things don't work out. So, of course, you're asking, well, yeah, but the rock burst forth water. They got their water. So what's the big deal? The big deal is how you get it. You have people that work real, real hard and make a lot of money and make a good life for themselves. You have people that cheat and lie, and take advantage of people, and they make a lot of money, and the result is the same, but the means are what's different. The means don't justify the end. always have a consequence when you don't follow the right way. And this is really kind of what this is all about. You follow directions. This is why we have all these commandments. God had, brought out forth Adam and Eve. They had Cain and Abel. There was murder. People were trying to attack God. God's like, we need some directions. He had the 7 Noahide laws. You still had people doing what they wanted. God's like, okay, now I need to point out, get a people, point out a people, and have them be examples. And the Hebrews, Israelites, I'm going to give you the 613 commandments, be an example. Okay, that's what it's all about. Okay, follow God's directions, folks, and let's be good to each other. Let's hope, let's pray, but let's take action and be nice to each other. Don't just hope and pray. It takes action too, okay? Shabbat shalom. Thanks as always for listening.